Bienvenidos al canal Viajando con Buda. El budismo no puede estar anclado en ideas arcaicas de hace 2500 años que en su momento tuvieron sentido, pero que muy probablemente ya no lo tienen. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a Brian Victoria, un estudioso del budismo de talla internacional. Con él hablaremos sobre el karma de forma crítica, porque es difícil negar que en la historia del budismo el karma se ha utilizado de una forma muy alejada de lo que debe ser la compasión budista.
Brian, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here in this channel. It's a real pleasure for me. You are very well known in the Buddhist sphere for your book and article that are very critical with certain aspects of traditional Buddhism. Why do you think we should look at the dark side of traditional Buddhism?
Okay, well, let me begin by that discussion by sharing with you and your audience my own experience as a professor of Buddhist studies who for many years brought mostly American students to Kyoto to study Buddhism for a semester. All right. And very often the students would ask me, they'd say, hey, professor, how long do we need to study this sect of Buddhism? Or how long do we need to study a particular religion before we can move on to the next religion or study something else? And my answer to them was always this. I said, well, first of all, when you study another religion, you need to, number one, listen to the spokespeople, the teachers, the preachers, the clerics for that religion. Listen to them and ask them to explain what their religion is about. And then also you will want to read some of the written materials, the sutras or the Bible verses or whatever about that particular religion, and try to understand the doctrines and the theory behind what the teachers or the clerics are telling you. And then I said, but then at the very end, you need to do something that's rather unusual. And that is you need to ask them, what is the dark side of your religion? And if they say to you, oh, my religion has no dark side. My religion is perfect. It's all bright side. It's all truth. There's nothing wrong about my religion or nothing wrong about the people who have believed in my religion. It's all the truth, nothing but the truth. And I say to my students, if somebody tells you that, you should not just walk to the door, you should run to the door. And why should you run to the door? Because even if the religion you're studying is true, the people who are practicing the religion are not perfect. They've never been perfect. They aren't perfect and they never will be perfect, which means there are going to be things in that religion, especially religious practice, that does not is not all brightness, all goodness. There are terrible things that people in every religion have done. And so it's very important for us, especially when we're studying religion, to not think that we're going to find a religion that is all perfect and that all the people in that religion are perfect, because they never are. And if we think that, we're always going to be disappointed. So it's really important to begin when you study a religion to recognize you're studying the practices and the beliefs of fellow human beings, fellow Homo sapiens. And we Homo sapiens, in the 3,000 years of our history, 300,000 years, we have done some wonderful things and some terrible things. And that's also true, unfortunately, about religion as well. Now, one more thing I would like to say, and this is something that we almost never talk about when we're talking about Buddhism is that we need to understand that Buddhism is one of many religions that was born during what is called the axial age. The axial age may be a new term to many people, and unfortunately, we don't have time today for me to. I hope, Jesus, that sometime in the future we'll be able to come back and talk about Buddhism as an axial age religion. But basically, the axial age occurred between 800 BCE and 200 BCE. And one of the characteristics of these new religions that were born during that time is that they recognized that good and bad, right and wrong were just not something for their own tribe, their own nation, but that good and bad was something that was true for all people in all nations, everywhere. And the Buddha was one of those people. He was one of those teachers who had that understanding about the nature of religion. It was a new understanding to human beings, because up until that time, all human beings had practiced animism, and animism is a tribal religion. So it was a big step forward to realize that religion was not just for your tribe, but was true for all people. All right. But that's something we need to talk about more. All right.
I
But
read
and the
something
third, yes,
in the book, in the article you sent me. I read
yes,
few weeks ago. I read about this. Very very interesting. But I think we have to focus in karma. Is the
yes.
conversation?
Okay. One more thing I would like to
Yeah,
share with
sorry.
you, and that is that Buddhism is not a revealed religion. It's not a revealed religion. Now, that may be a new term for many people. What that means is that most religious people, most religions, they believe there is a God or gods, and that the God or gods wanted human beings to understand what he was like. And so he sent his prophets or his son, in the case of Jesus, his son, to teach people what God is like and what God wanted people to do and what God didn't want people to do. Okay. And so that meant that's fine. But here's the problem. If you have a revealed religion and you have a Bible or a Quran or some religious writing, if it's in my Bible, then it's true. But if it's not in my Bible, it's not true. And therefore, you have in revealed religions, the major revealed religions are Christianity and Islam and Judaism. So if it's not in my book, that means it's not God's teaching. And if it's not God's teaching, it must be the wrong teaching. It must be an evil teaching. And therefore, we have to destroy it. And therefore, what we see in the West in particular is this continual conflict between religions, because they all think they have the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help them God. And so this makes it very hard for them to work together, because each of them has a different understanding of God, a different understanding of the truth. But Buddhism is not like that. I call the Buddha uh, simply a person who discovered the truth, like Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton discovered gravity. He didn't make gravity. All right. He simply said, oh, it's always been here, but this is the way gravity works. The Buddha understood this is the way existence works. All right. Therefore, his main point was to understand existence and then relieve the suffering that came out of a misunderstanding of the nature of existence. Okay. So
All right.
basically, if anything contributed to human suffering, that could not be the Buddha's teaching. It could not be the teaching of the Buddha if it contributed, if it added to suffering. His whole purpose was to eliminate suffering. All right. And we get
Exactly.
the best example of this is when the Buddha met a group of people called the Kalamas. I don't know if you've heard of the
Yeah,
Kalamas,
of course. It's
but
very
all right.
famous that
They were
that
very famous
part.
because
Yeah.
they were all of these religious teachers who were visiting them, and each one said, "We have the whole truth, and these other people are all wrong." And the Kalamas were very confused about, well, who has the real truth and who doesn't? And so they asked the Buddha when he visited, how should we try to understand all these teachers who come and say, we and we alone have the whole truth? And you probably remember the Buddha's very famous response. And he said this, he said, please, Kalamas, don't go by oral transmission. Don't go by lineage. Don't go by testament. Don't go by canonical authority. Don't rely on logic. Don't rely on inference. Don't go by reasoned contemplation. Don't go by the acceptance of a view after consideration. Don't go by the appearance of competence. And don't think the religious cleric is our respected teacher. But when you know for yourselves, these things are unskillful, blameworthy, criticized by sensible people, and when you undertake them, they lead to harm and suffering, then you should give them up. So to me, this is the only religion that I know of in the world in which the founder, the leader of the religion says, you have to think for yourself. You have to decide for yourself for what is not harmful, what is beneficial, what it relieves suffering. If you find some teaching somewhere that adds to suffering, that adds to harm, we should give it up. Even if it were a teaching of I don't think it's a teaching of the Buddha, but even if it were, we should still give it up. And we determine that with our own minds by listening and thinking about what is wholesome, what is positive, and what is negative. Okay. Now that's the background to what I would like to say about karma.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All
Okay, I
right.
agree with you. And maybe probably that is the reason because we are talking today. We are Buddhists because what you had said. Okay, but let's talk about karma. Very
Yes.
interesting
Let's talk about karma.
conversation. I'd like to know when did the concept of karma arise, and this concept evolve within Vedic religions?
Yes, that's really a very important question because we tend to think that when we read a book about Buddhism, that words like karma or dharma or samsara or nirvana, that they were all invented or created by the historical Buddha. But none of them were. They all have a much older history. All right. And they all come out of animism. They all begin in animism. But yet each religion, as I was talking about, in this axial age, there is this transition between animism to these new religions. So let's talk about karma. In Sanskrit, karma simply meant action. That's it. Not good action or bad action, right action, wrong action, just simply action of any kind in Sanskrit was karma. But when it took on a religious meaning, it took on a religious meaning in what's called the Rig Veda, the RIG, Rig Veda. Now, the
Yeah.
Rig Veda was part of Indian animism. Now, in Indian animism, in the Rig Veda, what karma means is proper ritual action. Proper ritual action, especially proper ritual action with regard to making sacrifices to the gods, not to the god, because all of the animistic religions had many gods.
Yeah.
So you had to do by this time, the Brahmin class, the priestly class, they claimed that they and they alone knew how to make the proper ritual actions, the proper sacrifices to the gods, so that the gods would grant them favors, like would grant them rain, would grant them food, a good harvest. So that was what karma was before the Buddha, proper ritual action. Now, when the Buddha comes along in this axial age, he changes the definition of karma. And he says that karma is action with intention. It depends on the intentionality that you do an act with. If you do the action with proper intention, which is to wholesome conduct, to help others, that action is good karma and will have a good result. On the other hand, if you do things with a bad intention to harm other people, then that is bad karma and it will produce a bad result. So what he did is he turned this the ritual content of karma in the Rig Veda into an ethical value, an ethical system. And this was his big, well, we could call it an invention, but it was his big insight into the nature of karma. All right? Now, but there is a problem. And the problem with karma is that we all know that when the question is, well, suppose you do a good action, all right, and you help other people. But that doesn't necessarily mean, A, that they're going to understand that as a good action, or B, that they'll do something good for you because you did something good for them. Maybe they'll do something terrible to you. Maybe they misunderstood why you did something. All right? So that's one problem. Another problem is this. Suppose you're climbing a mountain, all right? And you are the person, there's a group of you climbing a mountain, and you're near the top. And as you get near the top, you accidentally push a stone or a rock, and that rock accidentally falls and it hits the person who's below you. It hits them in the head and kills them. Is that karma? No, the Buddha said that is not karma because you did not have the intention to kill the other person. So there's no bad karma that results without the intentionality. All right? So intentionality becomes the central focus of the Buddhist understanding of karma.
But this is, I think that is very important for Buddhist ethic. I mean, karma, maybe we're not able to understand in Buddhism if we don't understand the ethical point of view and the law of karma is something integrated with Buddhism.
Okay, well, what happened though soon after the Buddha, maybe during the Buddha's time, we don't know. But the question came, all right, suppose you do all of these good things and you get all of this good karma, or more to the point, suppose there's somebody who does some terrible things. All right, he hurts lots of other people. All right, but he goes on to get a lot of money. And when you look at his life, in spite of all the terrible things he did, all right, when he dies, it looks like he was rewarded, that he didn't suffer any punishment for all the bad things he did. Right? So how can you claim that good karma will produce good results and bad karma will produce bad results if sometimes when a person is living, all right, they don't get any bad results? that means, well, karma's not true. They should have gotten some bad results, but they died a rich man, they died a happy man, etc. All right. So that seems to suggest then that karma isn't true because some people don't get punished in life, in this life, for the bad things they do. So then, of course, what happened was this belief in an afterlife, in rebirth, and that they are reborn, and the way they are reborn, or something that happens to them in their next life, when something bad happens to them in their next life, that is a result of something bad they had done in a previous life. Right? So then
Exactly.
suddenly when something bad happens to a person, you look at that and say, haha, that's not because, say, for example, the mother is an alcoholic, all right? And because she doesn't take care of her body, so her child is born mentally handicapped or is born physically deformed, whatever. So instead of saying, we'll say, oh, you see that child who is mentally handicapped, the child who has only one arm, only one eye, that's because the child did something terrible in their past life. And that's why they only have one eye. That's only why they're sick. And that's only why they have one arm. So then the child becomes the victim, deserves to be punished for what happened, what he or she did in their past life. This is when karma becomes a very problematic idea.
Problematic. So you have begun to talk about the dark side of laws of
Yes.
karma in traditional Buddhism. So this is important topic. I'd like to understand this dark
Yeah.
side of karma.
Okay. Well, before we move to that, let me though emphasize there's a bright side, a good side to karma. Because up until that time, in many religions, when something bad happens to you, you think that God is punishing you, that there's some God or gods out there, and they look at you and they say, oh, you did something bad, and now we're going to punish you. All right. And so what it means is that the person who punishes you is outside of yourself. All right. But at least the positive side of karma is that we are responsible for our own actions. We have to take responsibility for everything we do, all right, good or bad. There's no God to punish us. It's up to our own actions. So it does hopefully create in our minds a feeling, if I want to live a happy life, if I want to live a good life, I have to treat other people respectfully. I have to live a life that is good for them, because hopefully they will understand that and they will do good for me. Usually, if you do good for another person, they appreciate that usually, and they do good for you. All right. And so it usually does lead to a better life for you if you act with kindness and with compassion to others. So the good side of karma is that it forces you to take responsibility for your own actions and doesn't allow you to think there's somebody else out there who's doing something to you for this reason or for that reason. Okay, so that's the good side. All right.
Yes.
Now, here's the dark side, and that's expense. I mean, and I would like, instead of giving these examples to you, to give you these examples artificially, I'd like you to listen to exactly how the karma was used especially in Asian Buddhist countries, to explain events. All right.
All right.
Especially to understand negative or events. So here's one example, And this example comes from Japan, which is what I'm most familiar with. And it comes from World War II. And it comes from the fact that, of course, in World War II, in any war, many soldiers die, right? So
Yes.
soldiers die. So the question is, how does a Buddhist priest explain to the widow of a Japanese soldier why her husband or her brother or her friend, why did he die in the war? All right. That's a natural question. What did my brother, what did my husband do that was so bad in his previous life that he was killed in the war? So this is how a Buddhist priest who was with, his name was Soto Zen, and he was with the True Pure Land sect of Buddhism, which is the largest single sect of Buddhism, much larger than the Zen sects, the largest single sect of Buddhism. And this is how he explained it. He said, everything depends on karma. There are those who, victorious in battle, return home strong and fit, only to die soon afterwards. On the other hand, there are those who are scheduled to enter the military, yet die before they do so. If it is their karmic destiny, bullets will not strike them, and they will not die. Conversely, should it be their karmic destiny, then even if they are not in the military, they may still die from gunfire. Therefore, there is definitely no point in worrying about this. Or expressed differently, even if you do worry about it, nothing will change. So what is their karmic destiny? That means they have what they did something terrible in their past life. And so they have a destiny. They have to be killed in this life to repay something that they did terrible in their past life. Now, why is this idea so evil or reactionary? Because you see, what happens is the death of a loved one on a battlefield is the responsibility only of that soldier and his past conduct. It's not the responsibility of the officer, the emperor who started the war, who ordered him to try to kill the enemy. It's all his fault. Don't blame the emperor. Don't blame anybody else who started the war. It's all his fault. All right. So what this does, it allows, when you have that idea, it allows social injustice. It gives a free pass, an exemption to social injustice, to social oppression, and makes it all the responsibility of the individual. Okay. So I think that is really one particular, especially this is, of course, we're talking about East Asia. So this is the Mahayana tradition. So the Mahayana tradition, Northern School of Buddhism. Now, of course, there are some Buddhists who out there say, well, okay, then that Northern School of Buddhism, it's like the Protestants and the Catholics. The Catholics go, well, the Protestants, they have this wrong idea about Jesus. Or the Protestants say, no, the Catholics have the wrong, that's what happened. Yeah. But anyway, in Buddhism, of course, we have the Southern School. All right. So perhaps you'd be interested in how it's interpreted in the Southern School,
yes,
in the Theravada tradition.
And I bet it's very, very similar, maybe worse.
Yes, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Also, by the way, it's also true in Tibetan Buddhism. But anyway, let me give you an example from Theravadan Buddhism. And this is a very recent example. So in 2002, I was invited to participate in a Buddhist academic conference in Bangkok. And I was already aware at that time that there was a bar section in Bangkok that was very famous or infamous because they had very young children, and they were using these young girls as prostitutes. Some of them were only 10 or 11 or 12 years old. So when I went to Bangkok for the conference, I saw, of course, that there were many. This is my second visit, and I knew already that every morning the Theravadan monks went onto the streets and walked down the streets, and lay people had prepared food for them, and they would give the food to the monks. And they did that, the lay people did that because they were hoping for good karma, and that good karma would mean that they would have a better rebirth in the future. So I understood that. All right. But what I didn't understand was why the Thai monks, or especially the leaders of the Thai Sangha or the Thai community, why those leaders didn't speak out against or try to end this system of having basically children, female children, act as forcing them to act as prostitutes. So I asked one of the senior monks at the conference who spoke good English, the senior Thai monks. I said to him, well, why don't you speak out? Or why doesn't the Thai Sangha try to do anything to even help the girls? And he said, well, he looked at me and he said, well, you must understand, those girls did something bad in their past lives, and that's why they've ended up as prostitutes in their present life. And he said, but if they do good things in this life, they can change their bad karma and they can have better good karma in the future. Now, I thought to myself, well, does that mean that they should be good prostitutes in this life? But I didn't say that to him. But what I did say to him is, I said, I looked him close. We were sitting very close to each other. And I looked him in the eyes and I said to him, do you really believe that? And then he took his two hands and grabbed my hand in his two hands. And he looked at me and he said, you must be a bodhisattva. Now, so I didn't, that was there was nothing more that I didn't want to get into an argument. So I bowed, and that was the end of the conversation. But the point I take from that is, again, whether it's Mahayana Buddhism or whether it's Theravada Buddhism, this idea that people, terrible things happen to people in their future lives because of something terrible, because of something bad they did in their past lives. That, to me, when it results in young girls being forced into a life of prostitution, that is totally unacceptable. And I see that as a point where karmic, it's not karma so much as karmic retribution. Karmic retribution is being used, or I hopefully would say misused, to promote social injustice. Now, what's even more striking about this, Jesus, is it's not, I gave you the example in Japan, right? And I gave you an example in Theravada Buddhism. Okay, I'd like to give you just one more example. And the problem with this example is that it is in the most famous of all Mahayana sutras, the most famous, which would be the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra, whether in all of East Asia, is the single most important Buddhist sutra. There are thousands of Buddhist sutras, tens of thousands, but the Lotus has certainly had is certainly most widespread, and it's had the most impact. Now, this is what it says in the Lotus Sutra at the very end of the sutra. And I invite your listeners, they can easily go online and read the end of the sutra for themselves. But it's not very long, so just let me read the few sentences in it, all right? So the end of the sutra says, if there is anyone who disparages or makes light of those who uphold this sutra, saying, "You are mere idiots. It is useless to carry out these practices. In the end, they will gain nothing." Then, as punishment for this offense, the offense of ridiculing people who hold onto the sutra, who uphold the sutra. All right. Then it says, as punishment for this offense, that person will be born eyeless in existence after existence. But if there is anyone who offers alms to them and praises them, and then in this present existence, he will have manifest reward for it. If anyone sees a person who accepts and upholds the sutra and tries to expose the faults or evils of that person, whether what he speaks is true or not, he will in his present existence be afflicted with white leprosy. If anyone disparages or laughs at that person, then in existence after existence, he will have teeth that are missing or placed far apart, ugly lips, a flat nose, hands and feet that are gnarled or deformed, and eyes that are squinty. His body will have a foul odor, with evil sores that run pus and blood, and he will suffer from water in the belly, shortness of breath, and other severe and malignant illnesses. Now, what's happened, Jesus, as a result of this sutra in Japan, which I know best, for example, over the century, people who have gotten leprosy, who have mental illnesses, they deserve to have leprosy. They deserve to have a mental, and not only them, but their families. The families. And so what the families would do, especially with people who were mentally ill, they would lock them in a room and never let anyone know that there were even such people in their family. Because if they knew, that meant, for example, their daughter, a healthy daughter, if they had a brother who was mentally ill, that meant that the healthy daughter could not have a good marriage because they would be married into a family that had mental illness or had a sickness. So the leprosy, over the centuries, around all of the Buddhist temples, you will find hundreds of lepers who were there begging in front of the temple just so that they could eat. All right. And then they were blamed for their leprosy. They had no idea about, viruses, et cetera, et cetera. They were blamed because of karmic retribution for what had happened to them. So, that again shows us how harmful this belief in karmic retribution not only can be, but historically has been for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years in Asia. I hope that can explain the dark side
Exactly.
of karma.
Very, very interesting. But my question is, as Western Buddhists, we cannot assume this kind of laws of karma. So, do you think we can rebuild the Buddhism to create a new way of thinking around Buddhism?
Well, I hope so. It's an open question, and it really depends on us. All right. So Buddhism is not as I mentioned at the beginning, Buddhism is not a revealed religion. It's a discovered religion. And so 2,000 years ago, 20 or more, the historical Buddha discovered many, many important things. Especially he discovered that we don't have an eternal soul. What a wonderful discovery from my point of view. Some people hate that discovery, but I think that's a wonderful discovery. All right. But the question is, does that mean that all of the discoveries, you think of science, all right? We have we discovered, Sir Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity. Wonderful. But now we've gone on and discovered lots and lots of more things about the nature of existence. Sir Isaac Newton couldn't build a rocket ship to fly to the moon or let alone Mars, but now it's possible. So my proposal to listeners is that if Buddhism is a meaningful practice to you, and you see something in Buddhism that clearly has contributed to human suffering, we have to join together and think together how we can create a new understanding of karma that will not be responsible for suffering, will not be responsible for harming, will not be responsible for blaming the victim for what's happened to them. So one of the things that I think that's clearly happened, Buddhists have to be open to the discoveries made in the social sciences. And what discoveries are those? The discoveries, well, in medicine too, the discovery in medicine that leprosy is a disease, that it can be cured, that it has nothing to do with what a person did in their past life. It happens to do with a particular illness, a virus that they contracted, and that virus can be destroyed, killed, and that they can be made whole again. All right? So we don't have to look for, we can understand why people in the past, I think it's when we look at religion and we look in people in the past didn't understand why there was an eclipse of the sun. They didn't understand why there was a particular disease. And so they made it all, they looked to religion to explain these natural phenomena. But now we know that there's medicine to cure disease, all right? That there is astronomical science to help to teach us why there are eclipses of the sun. It's not a devil who's eating the sun, et cetera, et cetera. So we should also be open then to new ideas about how social injustice forms. For example, all right, we're talking about that dead soldier. The soldier died on the battlefield not because he had done something terrible in his past life. He died because the emperor was a greedy man who wanted to enlarge the Japanese empire, and he was quite willing to send young men out to get killed. The emperor never went out himself. He was never in any danger. But now we understand how what we would call the ruling class in a society is willing to use the poor, is willing to set up a system, a capital system of economics where people are exploited for their labor, right? And we understand that there are other ways of organizing society that do not rely on economic exploitation. There are other ways to have fair distribution of land so that not just a few landowners own almost everything and everyone else is a tenant farmer and has to sell their daughter into prostitution in order for them to even stay on the land. So we have to, number one, be open. Buddhists have to be open, number one, that we live in a class society and that the class society inevitably produces social injustice, but that we have the power to change a class society. We have the collective power to make a fair and just society if we collectively work to do it. All right. So we have to have that. And that the same goes for medicine across the board. And the second thing we have to understand is that there is not only individual karma, but there is collective karma. All right. Now, the best example of that we're seeing today, every day we read about the children in Gaza who are blown up. All right. No heads. Their arms and legs are cut off with no anesthesia. Would any Buddhist would any Buddhist priest dare say, oh, those children who lost a leg, They lost a leg because they did something terrible in their past life. And that's why thousands of the children lost their legs now in Gaza.
Yeah.
Would any Buddhist dare say that? If they said that, I would say, go to hell to you and to the Buddhism if you think that is what Buddhism is about. All right.
Yeah.
So we have to realize there is something called collective karma, and that it does come from social injustice, and that we do have the power, if we're willing to get off our cushions and do something about it. And I guess that's
Yeah.
the challenge I would leave for you and for your listeners.
Anyway, I think to build a new kind of understanding about Buddhism without karma and without rebirth it is a very big task. Anyway, I hope we can see it. I don't know if you want to add something.
Well, let me say this. I do support the idea that our acts with intentionality have consequences. And I think it's important for each of one of us to realize that we can't get away with anything. We think sometimes, we think we're very clever. I can get away with stealing a little bit of money. Nobody will ever know. But they all have consequences. Even if, for example, I do believe there's something called karmic retribution, but not in a future life. The karmic retribution is if you hurt another person and you realize that, in fact, that person is yourself, right? And you're willing to hurt yourself, and you're willing to cause pain to others. That means that you're not really able to fully enjoy the life you're living now, all right? Because your greed takes over and gets in the way of fully appreciating who you are, who they are, where you are, etc. So I see karmic retribution as something that actually happens to you in this life. You don't have to wait for a future life, right?
Exactly.
And number two, I do believe that, thanks to the fact that we know that in Buddhism, we understand there's no eternal soul. But I do believe, the Buddhists are quick to say there's no life and death. All right. And when people hear no life, of course there's life. When a baby is born, that's life. And when in the Catholic Church, especially, the Catholic Church, when they're conception, the child life begins at conception and dies at death. But I say, no, that is not even scientifically true. Why? Because the male has a sperm and the sperm is alive. The woman has an egg and the egg is alive. So what happens at conception? Two pieces of life join together, not into a new life, into a new form of life. Does that make sense? It joins, There's already life.
Yeah.
It's a new form. What about death? Oh, the person dies. Now we know, Jesus, that more than 70% of us is water. Our brain is 85% water. What happens to that water when we die? Does it disappear? No, it changes to water vapor. And most of it will go up into the air, into the clouds. It will rain. The rain will come down on the rivers and on the lakes. Have you ever thought, Jesus, that when you take a glass of water and you're drinking the water, that water is coming from lakes and from rivers and from the underground? You're actually drinking dead people, Jesus. Have you ever thought that? It's true scientifically.
Yeah,
part of that water is dead people. Part of the air we're breathing is what the next breath could be from Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar had the same atoms of air that you're breathing. All right. So, well, what does that mean? It means, you've seen in Zen, of course you've seen in Zen, it's called in Japanese the enso, that circle. This is a very famous Zen circle.
Yes.
that life does continue. We're part, the trees, everything that is living will continue. Everything that's living has a way, a seed, some way to continue. And we're part of that. We're part of that life. So there's no life and death doesn't mean that life and death, but what it means is that life continues again and again and again. And every time it continues, it's changed just a tiny bit. When we put up our hands, we know these were originally legs. But millions of years ago, one of our four-legged ancestors stood up, Homo erectus, stood up, and these changed to arms, right? So, I mean, every time life, depending on the environment, and it changes. So my point is here is that life is a continuous circle, right? What seems to be death is really only preparation for the next form of life. And I think Buddhism understands that. All right. And I think that's a wonderful understanding. It's just so long as we can get out from blaming the victim for something terrible that happens to them as if they're at fault. Now we have these other tools that we should welcome the fact that we have that we have medicine that can help the leper and not blame the leper for what happened. All right. That we can help that young girl by having land reform so that no parent wants to sell their young daughter into a life of prostitution. Of course they don't want to do that. But sometimes they have to live. We have to create a society where nobody is forced to sell their daughter into prostitution. Right? To me, that's our responsibility as Buddhists.
Exactly. I agree. Very, very interesting conversation. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to be able to talk to you. I hope we can find time to talk about another interesting topic.
Well, what I'd like to talk about sometime in the future is how Buddhism is a reflection of axial age religion. All right.
Okay.
Because I think this is a topic that almost no one ever talks about. They don't even realize that. Okay. Anyway, hopefully we'll have another chance. Wonderful to talk to you, Jesus, and thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Hasta la vista.
Adios.